Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming from Gartner, Vice President and Distinguished Analyst Whit Andrews and Research Vice President LeHong.
The velocity and the acceleration of Google's brand power is virtually unprecedented in business history. In fact, now, less than 10 years after it was first whispered that there was a new search engine, Google is number 7 in global brand power, value, and recognition.
We only need to look at Google's leadership in web search. We're talking about 65 to 70% market share in the US, 80% globally. The bottom line is that Google is a brand that people trust. Actually, Google is a brand that consumers and advertisers trust. As CIOs and IT decision makers in this room, we must now decide if we will allow Google to become our strategic partners in technology.
This isn't a trivial issue. Anytime the people in this audience invite a new vendor in to serve a strategic role in their companies and in their governments, on the line go their reputations and their professional and personal futures.
And you guys are asking us the questions. Our inquiries at Gartner, if you saw the chart previously, are at an all-time high for Google, especially compared to other vendors. You're asking us, should Gmail be my primary email service provider? Should I shift over to Google Docs? Should I move some of my enterprise applications onto the Google Cloud into the future? Right? These are pertinent questions that you guys are asking us. And we're going to discuss these concerns as well as the enterprise future of Google in this discussion. So, Chief Executive Officer of Google, Eric Schmidt, was last year in 2005. Let's welcome him back to Symposium.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
We just heard your third quarter earnings last week, Eric. Congratulations on the great growth.
Thank you.
Now,
And by the way, thanks for having me back.
we're delighted to have you, Eric. Genuinely, we are. We have a full crowd today. We're very pleased you've joined us. About 7% growth, it looked like, but most of that seemed to come in advertising. And we'd like to turn now to focus on the enterprise. For every dollar you make, about 3 cents come from the IT enterprise buyers like the people out there in the audience. We know, revenue figures don't always mirror investment, though. Can you give us some sense or some quantification for your investment in the enterprise?
We actually don't distinguish in the way that you're describing enterprise and non-enterprise, because we start every day assuming that boundary is becoming less and less a dividing wall for applications. So on the one hand, we have some number of hundreds of engineers whose sole job is around enterprise search and enterprise applications. But that's not really fair, because there's another 1,000 engineers who are doing the app strategy, and there's another couple thousand engineers doing the search strategy, and they all essentially work as one technical team. And in fact, they report into very similar management structures for that reason. So while it's true that the vast majority of our revenue is advertising, and I think given the growth of advertising globally, that's probably going to be true for a long time, we have taken the position that the enterprise is an important business, but even more important, there's an opportunity for a new platform, and that platform spans both the enterprise and normal consumer behavior.
So, in the past, you've talked about the fact that you plan based on an innovation level rather than a growth level. And what that ends up essentially is that your employees work on projects that they feel are very interesting, that they really believe in. And that's been very successful for you. You've had a lot of initiatives that have success based on that. So can you perhaps describe to us how much of those employee innovation periods are being used towards the enterprise? How much time, perhaps you are putting towards enterprise?
Well, first place, enterprise is a huge priority for the management team, for myself personally. We think it is sort of the next big billion-dollar business after our new display business. Those are sort of two new big businesses. But again, I understand that everybody here thinks in terms of enterprise, and we're all fundamentally in this audience CIOs. But CIOs now deal with their employees who want a seamless experience at home and at work. And so the most interesting technical problems there have to do with how do you make that happen? If you look at the existing systems that are deployed by CEOs, they're all trapped in a 1980s architecture. It's relatively inflexible. And there are technologies that have been developed over the last 5 or so years which allow you to build applications that are secure and also flexible in a way that was never possible before, literally a new invention. The way this happened was the development of a technology known as AJAX, which had to do with use of JavaScript within browsers. And the first set of browsers were relatively insecure, as all of you unfortunately know. Google, for example, is now offering, and I'm not trying to pitch all of our products, but I'll end up talking about them as illustrative. The Chrome browser has tabs like every other browser, but each tab is in its own address space. So again, you get address space separation just like a traditional operating system. When you have address space separation, you have much higher security. Now, is this an interesting problem? Absolutely. How was this developed? A 20% time problem by a very high priority Googler who said, how do I solve this problem and I solve it for good? Now everyone else is trying to figure out how to copy our innovation. And I think that's how our enterprise story will go forward. We'll keep coming up with new ways of spanning enterprise and consumer to get the leverage from both, the reliability from both, and the user-centeredness of both. Another example would be in security. The security needs for corporations and the government are very significant. Those are very interesting problems. How do you make it secure but still allow access inside and outside the firewall using various forms of certificate revocation, things like that? We're building all of that.
It's interesting. It's because what I'm hearing is that we need to rethink the way that we divide up in our own minds kind of how you are devoting innovation time, things like that. So let me look at it another way, if I might. Ad revenue, as I say, 97% of your business. And we've said in the past, Gartner Research has predicted that through 2012, the revenue from non-advertising supported sources would not go up above 6%. Do you think that's crazy, or do you think that's...
We don't ever actually do that calculation, so I have no idea.
I'm sorry to interrupt, then why don't you?
Why would we know something from 3 years from now on revenue? It's not how we work.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
We run the company on sort of two principles. One is we like revenue to go up, and the second is that we like absolute contribution margin to increase. And I don't mean gross margin, I mean contribution margin on absolute dollars, on a net basis after everything else. So in a situation, what that says is that we're interested in any business that has positive revenue growth over its capital investment. And all of the businesses that we're in have that property. So again, we just don't answer the question the way you described. You might be right, might be wrong. We would love to have a humongous enterprise business as you define it, but we'd also love to have a humongous advertising business too. We'll take both.
Sure.
To be just to stick on this, our products are either free or $50 a person. So I was worried that we might be pricing it kind of high. And so we looked at it, and I called a whole bunch of customers, and I said, well, how's our pricing? And they said, well, we need this feature, this feature, this feature, this feature. And I said, well, how's our pricing? And then a number of them said, well, look, frankly, we're moving to this model. We'll pay whatever you want to charge, as long as it's below our current huge cost of ownership of the personal computer architecture we've built, which most analysts, including you guys, estimate in the many thousands of dollars, depending on it. So we decided to keep the price the same. And as a result, we have a couple million companies now using our applications approach. And we're starting from the bottom. The largest customers we have are 35,000 seats, so that's a pretty sizable corporation. 35, 40,000. We have some large universities that are in that way. If you were starting a company today, literally, if one of you went off to start your own corporation, and perhaps some of you will, you would begin using Google's solutions because they're so inexpensive and they're so scalable. So that tells you that we're in the right future, and now we have to get everybody from where they are today to that future, and that's what we're really trying to do. So the answer is we can have as much revenue as you would like. It's more a question of we really count users, not the revenue, and the revenue follows.
Okay. So if you're counting users, not revenue, that's intriguing, because one of the things that we saw in the most recent earnings was that Q3 in non-licensed stuff, that's the financial term, I think, stuff. So Q3 in non-licensed stuff was about 500 million, is that right? And I think it was about the same as the year before, but you also have talked about a lot of growth. So free is better than cheap, I think you've said.
Well, remember, that's actually, the problem here is you're looking at the way the financial people report all this stuff, which is not that interesting, but legally required. It's much more important to know that our core revenue in enterprise is growing much, much faster than our advertising business.
But Q3 to Q3, I realize it's a financial.
But we didn't report the number that you're asking.
I see.
Yeah, you're looking at aggregations of numbers, which is why it's more interesting to sort of talk about what is the underlying thing going on in the market. And the underlying thing going on in the market is people are basically replacing these older email systems by systems that are essentially handled by Google, that are Gmail sort of derivative. We walk in now, we have the sales force that's sort of energetic, if you will, and they walk in and they say, look, why don't you just try it? Do a test, see if you can do it. We'll help you get there. Inevitably, the customers have an installed base of users. They have to migrate. We have migration tools now, and it's one after the other after the other. It's like every day now. And to me, this shows the way. We're not trying to design the future. We're trying to invent it along the way, right? So it seems to me that that's a pretty good starting point, because everybody in this room is incredibly dependent on email. Corporations fundamentally run on email today. Google does a particularly good job of managing it. Gmail's growth is accelerating it from its current position in terms of users, which is unheard of, as we seem to be gaining share from everybody else. So I think that's a good example of the consumer and the enterprise growing together.
So you mentioned, just in that last statement, that you invent along the way. And what ends up happening, of course, you get a better product out of, just iterative development. At the same time, you've got a lot of products on the go.
Sure.
And it keeps your competitors busy, that's for sure. But the iterative approach plus the...
But by the way, again, we're not focused on the competitors either.
Okay.
This is about inventing the future, and we score ourselves whether we get it right or not based on whether customers like it. And by the way, we use it ourselves. We call it dog food. We use all of our stuff. We eat our own dog food, and we do it, and we do it, and we do it until we get it right. I mean, come on. So everything I'm talking about is stuff that we use every day, and if it breaks, we know about it first. And trust me, we're not very nice about that internally.
All right, that's fair. What about your...
It's got to work, right? People are critically dependent.
What about on the sales and support side? What kind of business are you building there to support the enterprise?
Well, it turns out that enterprise customers, for obvious reasons, need to talk to somebody. They need assistance. So we now have essentially dedicated sales teams with technical support. Most of the sales activity consists of a discussion about strategy. Our prices are so much lower than everybody else, it's never a price discussion. And instead, it's how do we get from where we are, and why is this feature not on your roadmap? That's roughly the sales call. And inevitably, the solution to that is, in some cases, the feature is not needed because there's a workaround. In some cases, the feature really is needed, and we need to prioritize that better. And there's a lot of activity there. And then finally, there's a migration. And we don't seem to have anyone migrate back. So it seems to be a great sales model so far.
Enterprises are so delighted, as you point out, by your willingness, even eagerness maybe, to drive down pricing in a lot of different ways. I know that in search in particular, which is an area that I cover, I've covered search and the portals since 1995. In that area in particular, you drove pricing way down. Enterprises now say, gee, sometimes Google's still up there a little high priced for me. I wish for free. You point out that, free is better than cheap.
Free is better than cheap, but let me tell you that we do actually want to charge for these enterprise quality services because we provide a lot of tiered support. All of $50 a year is not a lot, but it adds up.
Sure.
And it pays for the service level that we provide. So we had a long conversation about whether we should have everything in the enterprise be free, which would be highly disruptive for obvious reasons. But we concluded that it was actually better to build this model at a new price point with high quality service. And that's what that's essentially the strategy. So the price is low enough that people will clearly move to the platform if it works, but it's high enough to support the services that we need. The alternative, by the way, was to do ad-supported enterprise apps. We looked at that, and we thought that most corporations would not be that comfortable with random ads showing up in somebody's desktop, and I agreed with that.
So we understand that you recently had a tour of some of your enterprise clients. Can you share with us, some of the things that made you think, I need to tell the guys back at the Googleplex to stop doing this or perhaps start doing that?
I was struck by how frustrated people were, and again, I don't mean to speak for all of you, but I can tell you the people that I spoke with, how frustrated people were with the architectures that they had inherited from the previous CIO, to be honest. That these architectures were built 10, 15 years ago, and they were highly inflexible. The vendors supported the architectures pretty well, so that wasn't an issue, and they were fine vendors from their perspective. That wasn't an issue. But they couldn't get stuff done. And their customers, literally the internal customer, the end user within the corporation, was complaining, especially when it came to mobile devices and the mobility of applications. Because the customer, the internal customer, that is the internal CIO customer, literally wants a seamless experience. So the way we think about that at Google is you have an opportunity around mobile devices. Again, we have the Android operating system, which has another property that's free. And there are a set of vendors, including most recently Verizon, that have announced partnerships and very, very powerful hardware with extremely powerful operating system stacks that are highly secure on these fast broadband networks for mobile devices. Well, people want to build applications for that, and they want those applications to be securable through the firewall into the corporation. You can't do that with these older architectures. You just can't do it for all sorts of boring technological reasons. So the rough argument goes like this. In every case, they're moving from, for purposes of argument, a legacy email system which they internally manage. They have very, very sophisticated document retention requirements. So if they're going to move to Google Docs, for example, they've got to have revocation, tracking, document messaging, logging, all those kinds of things for all sorts of very good legal reasons. Some of which are services that we offer, some of which that we don't yet, but we're building. So the rough summary of what we're doing is adding all the necessary features to have enterprise class mail, obviously instant messaging, calendaring, those kinds of things. Calendar turns out to be a surprisingly dynamic product. I would have thought that Calendar was sort of the most interesting calendars were invented 20 years ago and nothing had changed. But in fact, calendars are used in corporations for very, very powerful reasons. They're in very complex trees of this relationship, all of which are ultimately political and structure the way the corporation is done. So things like that.
So it's interesting because what you've said is that you're seeing enterprises be trapped in brittle, aged systems to some degree.
Well, or mature systems.
Mature. And you're trying to help them escape to some new platforms, and to a new platform which you're developing. As you rethink that, we're very intrigued by, at least to mention Google Wave, and the Chrome operating system. Wave came up in the video before. These seem to be consumer focused at first, but maybe you could take it into...
I don't think of them as consumer-focused at all.
What I was going to say. So,
I think
take
of them as dual.
Take this to the kind of the merged platform that you just described, if you don't mind.
I was trying to talk about things which we're doing today, which is what you asked me about. What are people talking about today? So let's fast forward a year from now. So as you know, and as you mentioned, we have this very powerful browser called Chrome, whose market share is growing quite rapidly. It's open source, free, all that kind of stuff. And we are now taking it and building an operating system. So the open source project is called Chromium. And we're building an operating system called Chrome OS, which will be delivered on reference netbook hardware for both Intel as well as the ARM platform. So we'll have a little competition among all the different levels of the hardware. We've been working with the various hardware vendors since we announced this, and I had no idea how inexpensive computer hardware had gotten in the last couple of years. Again, because of the improvements in physics and perhaps the global slowdown, these things are so inexpensive, I have no idea how any of these companies make money. I mean, it's phenomenal that they can do as well as they do with such thin margins. So we want to take advantage of that with a free operating system to really get all those prices down. Our initial target is netbooks, and we define netbook pretty liberally, by the way, if you get my drift. But think of it as a portable device with an appropriate Wi-Fi connection and a very powerful browser. So the question is, at what point in a corporation could you substitute that netbook, if you will, for what you have today? Well, you have a set of legacy apps, which you depend on every day and which are important. How do we get them to this new model? And you go through the list, and some of them can be ported, and some of them can be remote hosted, and there's virtual operating systems, and there's a whole strategy to do that. So maybe in a year, it'll be possible for you to begin procuring, at least for some of your internal customers, a netbook as a solution that costs a factor of 5 or 10 cheaper than what you're paying today. That's pretty interesting, pretty compelling. It's worth sort of paying attention and figuring out where are you on that cycle. Can you be an early adopter? Do you need to wait until this ecosystem is built out because it's not done yet? And that's an example. So Wave is a similar story. Wave is a new way of looking at instantaneous communication. Think of it as email plus instant messaging plus pictures and video in a very, very fast way. Think of it as sort of message boards on steroids in a special way. And once you're in Wave is particularly applicable to corporations. If you think about collaboration within a corporation, a lot of the collaboration are small groups that are just sort of throwing ideas around. Here's an idea, where are you, what are you doing, what is this idea, what did you work on, so forth and so on. And Wave is a product that attempts to make that seamless. Both Chrome OS and Wave are not really shipping. Wave is in its initial public test. Chrome OS will be released reasonably shortly. And so I think it's appropriate for you all, as people who've listened to a lot of vendors over the years, you should be skeptical. You know, you should say, show me. And the answer is you'll get a chance to play with it and see if my claims make sense. And if they don't, then I'll represent to you that we'll get there. You know, that if there's something missing or something needed, we'll find a way to move this forward. Because in our model, we're in the information business, and that's what this is all about.
So if we think about the internet itself and in the future, we've just talked about some of the products, Wave, Chrome OS, and so forth. 5 years out, it's possible that the internet will be more non-English than English.
It will be more non-English. It'll be Chinese.
Access will be more for mobiles, of course, than PCs themselves.
Depends on the growth rate of high-quality mobile phones, yeah.
What about content? Things like, relevant content coming mainly from video, audio, rich images, rather than text itself. Essentially, the scenario of us, sitting in front of a PC reading an English text web might be very different in the future.
But that's a 1990s model. I mean, the new model, if you look at, find a teenager, and if you don't have one in your house, borrow one. I'm sure they're available. Talk to a teenager about the way they consume information, and remember that 5 or 10 years from now, that's your employee. It's a little frightening, by the way. And they consume this stuff very, very differently. They're not very good with calendars, which may have to do with the age. But they're particularly good at manipulating all of these different forms seamlessly. They go from one to the other to the other. And one of the things that's worth noting is that in the time period you're describing, and remember 5 years is a factor of 10 in Moore's law, 2 to the 18 months, right, do the math, that in that factor of 10, it'll be possible to have broadband networks throughout at least the Western world. It's already true in Korea and Japan and Singapore, for example, that are well above 100 megabits in performance. And at those speeds, the distinctions between radio, television, cable, all these sort of distribution distinctions, where I turn on the television to watch a video, really go away technically. The the distinctions may exist from a licensing perspective, but ultimately the owners of this copyright will see a larger market and they'll find a way to distribute it on the internet for pay or what have you. So all of these distinctions, the notion that somehow I'm in a web browser and text, and then I have a television, I have a radio, will all completely go away. If you look at YouTube today, I am shocked at how much high-quality content there is on YouTube, given all the other content, right? You look at this, and it's like everyone's favorite home video, but then there are these instructional videos and the marketing videos and so forth. And shockingly, we're beginning to actually make some significant money from YouTube, right? We're figuring out a way to advertise against professional content. So it shows you that as the internet sort of takes over all of these other mediums, it is possible to make real businesses of scale around things like video. And that's pretty exciting, because that means the content will move to it.
You know, when we see the, I always find myself, kids today, but it's grown-ups, you know, the Facebook, and there are a lot of people tweeting right now. Could you pay attention, please? Thank you. Out there in the audience.
By the way,
working.
the new model is they don't even look at you.
I know.
It's very disturbing, but you'll get used to it.
It is more than a little.
Yes, I agree. Yes, absolutely, no problem.
Thanks. My son is 8. I'll look forward to that. Okay. So speaking of Twitter, speaking of Facebook, we saw that another really large company with a web search engine today, Microsoft, appears to have struck a deal with Twitter and Facebook to incorporate real-time search of the status updates and the tweets. You know, I don't know what you felt like the proportion of great videos to not so great videos was on YouTube. You could say the same of tweets or Facebook status, obviously. What are you all thinking about real-time search, and what can we look forward to there from you?
Well, first, I think it's a smart deal for them, and I'd rather not talk about those specific companies except watch the space. From our perspective, real-time information is just as valuable as all the other information, and we want it part of Google. And real-time information is the two fine companies that you named, but there are many others as well. And our indices are able now to process real-time information and rank it. The technically hard problem is ranking the real-time information relative to in other words, to be precise, if this person is twittering and tweeting and this person is tweeting, how do we rank them? Who comes first in the order? What signals, what information? And that's an important and challenging technical problem. There are analogous problems in all real time, all of which are under development at Google.
It's intriguing. We've seen some models appear in Twitter. I know that PageRank, which is Google's, I know it's referred to as its core algorithm, a critical aspect of Google's relevancy ranking. We've seen Twitter ranks, Tonk rank begin to appear and things like that.
And I think one way to think about it is, so we're in the information business. I would assert that most of the people in this audience are in the information business, and that in your corporations, in the institutions you work for, people come to you to talk to you about information. Well, one of the things that people forget is that the rate at which information is growing is faster than anything else. So we're like always drowning in information. And that's why you never feel like you get ahead. You know, you finally understand this model or that model, and then there's another one. And it's because of this fundamental shift to user-generated content. And the two that you mentioned, Facebook and Twitter, are just good examples of this phenomena. It has a lot of implications. It means, for example, that most people's information will be gotten from other information as opposed to from traditional sources, right? You will tend to listen to other people more than anyone else. And so learning how to rank that, and again, if you're Google, everything's a ranking problem, is the great challenge of the age. As this huge explosion of videos and real-time information, and by the way, positioning information, where am I, what am I doing, where am I going, how do you rank and how do you sort all that? Well, that's a problem that Google knows how to solve.
That was my favorite tweet out of today so far. If you're Google, everything is a ranking problem. It's interesting. Now, we've talked about just now real-time search. We've talked about Wave, and you've kind of seen a future for it in the enterprise, as well as netbooks within the year. You said maybe even within the year it would be possible for us to do our jobs on netbooks.
Well, there's no question the netbooks will be available in 2010.
Sure.
So that's within a year. And again, I think everyone here, I hope, will try them out, and you'll find out, does it cover all the important applications? Remember, in the netbook model, it is the pure cloud computing model. There's no permanent hard drive on these devices. Everything is on the server. So the customer, in this case, the internal customer of a CIO, you just walk up, press the button, it boots in a couple seconds, and boom, off you go. And then you can share it. It has good security and all that kind of thing. It's a pretty attractive model to a CIO, in my opinion, speaking as a person who spent a lot of time with CIOs over the years. And it's something that we've been talking about in the industry for 20 years. So it's time for it to arrive.
And when you have this netbook model, are you expecting to have it be connected at all times to the internet, or is there going to be some local component from, say, your gears?
A very good question. So it turns out that the bailiwick of this has always been airplane flights. So part of the answer is that the airlines are now putting Wi-Fi on their airplanes, but that takes away from the fundamental point. All of these systems have to have some form of local caching model. There's a new standard in the internet called HTML5, which essentially supersedes in functionality a product that Google has called Gears, which essentially does a local cache of the information that you have in your web information, if you will, and then it automatically, when you reconnect to a broadband, it automatically resyncs in all the obvious ways. So that technology is now moving forward and getting to become part of standard browsers, which is a huge improvement. And it means that you can start building web applications that look a lot like PC applications. And put another way, 10 years ago, when we first talked about the internet, what we said is that the vision is that the internet will be able to host applications as powerful as those that are on the traditional personal computer architecture. Now, the PC architecture, by the way, has a dedicated hard drive, a fast CPU, big screen. Well, now these netbooks, for example, still have a fast CPU and a big screen, but they don't have the dedicated hard drive, but they have a very fast connection. So as long as you can solve the local caching problem while they're disconnected, you've got a pretty good shot at it. If you look at the PC architecture, the Windows architecture, for example, very fast on UI graphics, that technology has now been extended or added to modern browsers. So once again, the vision that we talked about way back when browsers came out is occurring. And it's just a question of at what rate can you begin to deploy this newer and less expensive and easier to use model.
So let's talk about the cloud for a moment. To make things black and white, the cloud can be used for two purposes. The first purpose is to make things just cheaper, faster, better. On the other end of things, the cloud can be used to do things that, perhaps recognizing patterns at a scale that we've never been able to do before.
The classic example for us is flu trends, where we can predict flu outbreaks faster than anybody else because we can look at the searches that everybody does.
On the enterprise side, are you guys looking at anything similar to the flu trends? Are you looking at, it seems right now you're looking at, of course, the utility of things like Google Docs and applications on that, but what about on that side?
I think it's very good question, very insightful model. Could you, the question here is, what is your goal, right? Well, an obvious goal is to get rid of all those specialized servers that are sitting in data centers that you can't find that are breaking all the time. Okay, that's a tactic. But once you've got all that information in a place that you have some control over, what are some of the things that you could do? Well, and your employees may or may not like this, but you can obviously understand better what they're working on, what they're doing, and so forth. That's the way corporations work. So you have at least a better understanding of what they're doing, how they're spending their time. So you could imagine a lot of products like that. I think right now we're more focused on building the underlying platform, and my guess is that you'll have an ecosystem of third parties that will evolve that will do a particularly good job of these more specialized questions, and there'll probably be a lot of interesting questions. I don't want us to get so into the gaming of what is happening to start building specialized solutions. Google does best when we build a solution that works for 100 million people, something which is simple and elegant in scales that we can put in our data centers and everybody can use, because we can run such services with less cost and greater efficiency, greater reliability than anybody else. That's our core competency.
When it sounds to some degree like you're constructing an environment in which ecosystems of trust can emerge. I'm thinking about my company can tell what I'm working on, and that's probably okay with me. Maybe my coworker being able to tell, though, might make me a little nervous, depending on who my coworker was. And my company might be nervous about other companies being able to tell. So what are you all doing in terms of examining how to create and affirm trust with companies and governments as you move towards the cloud architecture?
Well, you earn trust customer by customer. You build brands, by the way, customer by customer. You don't build a brand by advertising a lot. You know, the Google brand was built by person using it, finding utility, finding what works, complaining about what doesn't work, that kind of stuff. So in the enterprise, we've taken the position that the enterprise is the customer. And I think you'll see a relatively broad collection of behavior by companies. You'll have some companies that are incredibly tight with respect to their information rules, and you'll have others which are much more liberal with respect to this trust architecture that you're describing, which again I think is a very important point. And we're going to enable all of those because they're part of the platform, and we'll let the companies decide. Most companies, I think, will end up with a balance between what you just described. They'll find a middle ground between the collaboration that they want to encourage, but they don't fundamentally want everybody to see everything because of legal risks and so forth and so on.
So these trust architectures that you're talking about and building them, you know, for one customer at a time, you know, the government cloud that you guys announced is an example of
Yes,
that
absolutely.
for government. Each industry that we work with does have some, you know, built-in trust architecture. There are privacy standards and security standards that are already existing within those industries. You know, can you share with us perhaps a roadmap of some of the other industries you're looking at beyond the government cloud?
Well, again, it's not really a roadmap, it's really a facility. And because you have control over information access at any level of granularity, you can apply any set of rules you wish, right? So we don't take a position that it should be one way or the other. And what we want to make, so for example, you can decide whether you want to have these things go across the firewall or not. You can decide the sharing level between groups. You can have subdomains that allow or disallow it. And our model is flexible, and this is something we work out with the specific customers. And we're trying to not be doctrinaire about any of these policies. My experience with these policies is they get written down, they're complicated, they're often very heavyweight, and ultimately I think good judgment in the part of the companies tends to prevail.
So at the same time, I think, you know, industries and companies within those industries that are living with these standards like HIPAA in healthcare or PCI compliance on the payment side
Absolutely.
and so forth, already have a predefined set and are looking for vendors that have that, and you're suggesting that they need to rebuild that every time they use a Google product?
Well, again, the HIPAA is the law, PCI is the law, and so you fundamentally have to adhere to it. And my guess is that architecturally, you're going to see platform providers like Google provide a horizontal platform, and then, for example, for HIPAA compliance with data and applications architectures, you'll see third parties who specialize in that and go into vendors and really solve that problem. We're again trying to solve the broadest problem with the broadest flexibility. And because that gives us the most number of customers and the most scalability.
Have you started seeking out some of those partners? Are there some, you know, firms and companies that would match what you just?
They're coming, and I think this is our new messaging, sort of internal messaging for the next 6 months. Is it's time now, and I know some of them are in the audience, for people to figure out how to take their business logic, if you will, and connect it using our APIs to our underlying data stores. In the sort of self-centered Google model, so I apologize for that, imagine that Google has a lot of this cloud computing inside of it. It will be in your interest to be able to connect to that information and manipulate it to solve interesting problems, you know, good problems, bad problems, what have you. We use a set of open interfaces to access that data. It's very, very easy to go in and out of it programmatically. And so that's, again, the sort of messaging that we're saying here is let's get people sucking that data in and out, changing it, analyzing it, and so forth. These are pretty big businesses. Just look at the scale that we're talking about and then think about how many customers we really represent and the opportunities that presents for new information architectures. I think it's pretty exciting.
We've looked at trust with consumers, trust with companies, and now trust with industries, even at the association level. And I recognize that it doesn't make sense to talk a whole lot about other vendors specifically, but one of the things that we found out in the life cycle of IT is that, you know, nothing ever dies. It's not much of a life cycle. So How do you end up working in, say, 5 years' time in an enterprise effectively with the other vendors that have declined the invitation to exit just because you're there?
Well, hopefully the customer wins.
The customer wins.
If the customer is not winning, then there's something wrong in capitalism here. I mean, hopefully as our cloud computing model emerges, and by the way, we're not the only people doing cloud computing, and so the collection of companies that are genuinely trying to offer cloud services, the customer will go, literally you all will go to the embedded vendors and say, you will connect to my cloud, QED. You know, and by the way, the cloud vendors are nice enough to provide interfaces to do that, because it's in our interest to build bridges between the old and the new. And Google does something else that's worth noting. We make a commitment that we will not trap user data, and we in fact just announced the poorly named Data Liberation Front, which is a group of people whose sole job is to make sure it's very, very easy to get data out of each and every Google services.
The Data Liberation Front?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I don't think you need to apologize for that. I kind of like that.
Okay, well,
the
you like
Data Liberation
the Data
Front.
Liberation Front.
How many people are in the front?
There's at least 20.
At least 20 people.
And they have a little logo and everything.
T-shirts.
They have T-shirts, and I won't describe the T-shirts more than that. But they're very passionate, and they exist to make sure we are kept honest by you. In other words, their job is to make sure that we don't trap you in our cloud and then not let you leave to go to another cloud. And so that's how serious we are about this. So we have the data translation people, and then we have the data liberation people. I guess they have lunch together or something.
They meet in their mountain readout.
That's right. They meet secretly. And the important point here is, if you're not willing to walk the talk architecturally about this, then you're not serious. And I want you all to know that we're serious. So you should hold us to the standard that I'm articulating, and you should do it yourself. You know, can you really build scalable systems based on these new open architectures? I think you can. And again, from our perspective, we essentially have an unlimited hiring budget in the engineering components of this, because it affects, we're building more than just the Chrome OS browser or the Gmail for enterprises or what have you, the Google Apps platform. We're really building a whole new computational platform. And eventually, you could imagine or speculate that Google would be even more involved in the hosting and management of these services. We don't really know. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how the technology gives us an opportunity to play in that space.
So, you know, if we put all these things together for the enterprise, if we were to make a catalog of what you would have to offer the enterprise, you know, we'd have, of course, the apps itself, we'd have cloud, we have some of the appliances. Are there some things in the Google Labs that we can expect to add as pages to that catalog?
Well, we typically don't announce products that aren't shipping. So it's better to think about it in the following way. First place, all of our services are being hardened, and hardened meaning more reliability, more ability to administer. So for example, we now have customers that are so large that they need very sophisticated administration tools to administer these services, something which everybody here can appreciate if you're in a large organization. So we are now delivering the first versions of those with many, many more. So again, we're planning for scale there. So you have robustness, efficiency, and scale, all of which are obvious. The next thing is to make sure that the platform that we're building is fully functional, that it's possible for third parties to build these powerful applications on top of the cloud that I was describing. And the third is to complete the Google Apps vision. And the Google Apps vision is really about having cloud-based services that everybody uses. One way to describe that is to say that we're not interested in doing highly vertical or specialized businesses in the enterprise, because first, those markets are well served, we think, but second, they don't fit our model of platforms. They're more specialized. And again, they have different economics, different ways in which they're sold. But we are very interested in unleashing the data that exists within a corporation and being able to ultimately follow up on the insight that you offered when you said, what can I do now? You know, once I've got it all in the cloud, what question can I ask that I could never ask before? And I think that is an exciting opportunity before us.
Excellent. It's an extraordinary privilege to have welcomed you back today. Thank you so much.
No,
for
thank
joining.
you very much. It's always fun to be here. It's a great group, and I really appreciate, Gartner's been sort of the great leader in this for many, many years. You guys understand it better than anybody I know.
You're very gracious. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.